not maintained, that's the news.
Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me okay? Good morning and a warm welcome to the Meet the Regulator event here at the Gathering. My name is Robin Strang, and earlier this year I joined the board of OSCR. And as many of you will know, OSCR is an independent regulator and the registrar of over 25,000 Scottish charities and reports directly to the Scottish Parliament every year. And away from OSCR, my day job, I'm a sport and leisure consultant, but also the chair of Community Leisure Scotland and non-executive director for Scottish Canals and Sport Scotland's Trust Company. And prior to that, for 12 years, I was chief executive of Charities in England and Scotland. So very much a passion of mine, the charity sector. In addition to the effective strategic direction of OSCR, I consider my role as an OSCR board member, along with the other board members, to facilitate well-run charities and enable the sector to thrive. That's very much what we're here to do. Okay, I'd now like to introduce Maureen Mallon, who is OSCR's Chief Executive, appointed in 2019, and Maureen will guide us through the role of OSCR and share findings from the latest survey on the views of the charity sector and the views of OSCR. So, over to you, Maureen.
Robin. Good morning, everybody. I wanted to just check in how many people were here yesterday. Oh, fair old amount, excellent. And how many people were at the charity awards last night or watching it on and around? Well, congratulations for being up. It was a late night. We went along, quite a number of us, because this is such an exciting time for us to really come along and meet those we regulate and celebrate with them and celebrate with everybody. It's a very strange thing being in OSCR. I've shared this a number of times before, but one of the first things I did when I joined the organisation was come along to a gathering, the last indeed live gathering that there was, and how very strange for me indeed when people were coming up saying, "Oh, you work at OSCR, we love OSCR." And I was thinking, wow, we're the regulator, right? I mean, it's nice that people like us, but what was very clear to me then is that people had a real respect for the organisation and that we were working as a proper enabling regulator, which means that we are firm but fair, but we are also actually making sure that we're engaging and trying to empower and support the sector. So what I want to do today is to take you through a few things that hopefully will be new to you. I'm looking out and seeing some familiar faces, and I'm thinking, you probably know more about us in some ways than we do. So any tricky questions, then do please fire them in. But what we want to do predominantly today is to share a lot of the early findings that are coming through from our surveys, which we're publishing today. Hooray! So let me see if I can click this button and just seamlessly move in. So this is what I'm going to cover today. All fairly obvious, I think, but we want to just try and make sure that we're giving a fair amount of space at for the last sort of part of the session for questions. So really are leaving quite a big chunk of time there. So as we're going, please don't be don't be shy. If you can, sort of scribble things down if you want to actually come back to things with us. This is a meet the charity regulator, not a have a good listen to the charity regulator and then wander off again. Although, as Robin said, we will be here later if anybody wants to ask us any questions. So we want to also share a little bit about where we're going over the next year with the new board. So, Scotland's charity sector. It's a complex place, isn't it? What I always find interesting is that people talk about the charity sector as a sector, but they very often use it as that shorthand, but me really thinking about it from their own perspective, from their own thematic, from the part of it that they really are involved in. The scale, scope and reach of Scotland's charity sector is vast. I don't think anyone in Scotland who isn't actually touched and involved in an organisation, even if they don't know it, anything from colleges and universities through to community groups, church organisations, but mostly those small organisations that are in their local communities. And very often people just think, oh, that's just a couple of lovely people who do this, and there's a great charity and a lot of trustee work behind that. So huge scale, but most don't have any staff, and most have exceptionally low incomes. We very often find that we will get to hear voices of those who are part of the larger organisations, and that's fantastic. But one of the things that we work very hard to do is to make sure that we understand things from that scale, breadth and reach. And of course, one of the jobs of OSCR is to make sure that those who are in policy power particularly have a really strong understanding of that breadth and scale of the sector. It's really important that we use our data and intelligence to really inform what's going on from a policy perspective, be that in funders, in local government, in national government or UK and beyond. So I like this little photo here because actually it's a very nice, easy way for us to snapshot it. So you've no doubt seen it before. We keep looking for another one and then we come back to this because we really like it. So who are we? Robin highlighted the scale of the 25,000 charities. What's fascinating is that number's stability. So you know, that number, people look at it very often thinking, has it really gone down drastically? No. Have a lot of new organisations come on in the last year or two? Yes. So that number stays stable. It's about 25.5 at the moment. I find that a really fascinating thing in terms of the stability of that, the natural end that happens for some charities, which is again an interesting piece for us, because I think people very often think, really awful when a charity winds up. I think it's quite often something to really celebrate. If a charity's actually completed its purposes, done really good work and thinks, actually we can stop, somebody else will move this on, that's a really powerful thing. So we don't always look at it with the bad news story that people do. And of course it's lovely when new organisations come on stream too. Although we do spend a lot of time, I hear my colleagues all the time when they're on calls trying to encourage people to really look and consider whether or not there is a requirement for that particular charity in the area and in that theme. People very often will come along and say, I really think there's a need for this. And we're saying, well, actually, have you looked at the 15 other organisations in your locale who are doing something very similar? Maybe you should think about talking to them, volunteering with them, or actually just working out where the gaps are. So that space is a space that we spend a lot of our time. So it's very satisfying for us as an organisation to see that stability. We have a very new board for the most part. We have 2 continuity members, which is great, thank goodness. And it looked like we were being a bit sloppy about that. So if I can just confirm that actually what we've been doing in the background is really working hard to make sure that we're staggering appointments now. We're bringing people on to have 3-4 year appointments to do different things at different times. And unfortunately, we had a couple of people who had to leave very, very quickly for health reasons during the pandemic, which gave us the great opportunity to bring in five new board members. And of course, we're just in the middle of our recruitment for our permanent chair. The closing date was on Friday, so I can't pitch that to you. If you missed that, you missed that. But we're very excited about the fact that by October we'll be moving into really working with this board, with our new permanent chair, to really work on this year's corporate plan and thinking about what is the plan going to be, the development of that plan for the next 3-4 years, however long we actually decided we need to actually set that scene for. Lots of exciting things to do with that board, and we work very closely with the board. The board are also the regulator, so that space that you were in as a public appointee comes with an onerous responsibility, but they all seem to be as relaxed as they possibly can be about that, which is no bad thing. Staff team based in Dundee, and yes, what we do, like everybody else, we've moved into hybrid working, and we are doing a mix. You will find more and more that staff in the organisation are in the Dundee office. we've asked everybody to be in the office at least 2 days a week over the foreseeable future, because we want to get the best of having moved into the hybrid working space. We want to get the best for everyone, but we want to also make sure that we are around and available in the lovely offices we have there. Last quick thing I want to say on this slide is about this risk-based, targeted and proportionate regulation. That's a nice short line there, and what we really mean by that. We work with an awful lot of other regulators, we work with an awful lot of other organisations, so that if anything is happening, and quite a number of your bodies will be linked to, whether it's Care Inspectorate, Scottish Housing Regulator, others, you don't need all of us coming along and asking the same questions at the same time if there's an issue going on. So we work very closely with all of them to be proportionate. We use our data and intelligence to be smart about things too. We'll also look and think, oh, there's a trend coming through, let's do a deep dive in that particular thematic and so on. So when people look and say, wow, there's only 50 of you for 25,000 charities, that's a lot, how do you do that? Well, hopefully we do that reasonably smartly. You could tell us about that later, perhaps. So the functions, most of you, if you've come along to the regulator session, will know and understand our functions well. The key things that I want to really highlight here is this idea of determining whether a bodies are charities. All sounds very straightforward, but actually quite a complex thing to have a look at the charity test. And I watch colleagues scratching their heads over quite a lot of these areas a lot of the time, and really having to ask each other where things sit. People assume that we're actually just sitting there making informed judgments based on our own sort of personal and professional views, but there are very robust rationales behind all of this. And I'm very proud of the purity that I see happening in their decision making. We are an organisation who leave our views behind as we walk in the door. Classic civil servants in that way, and I can see Callum sitting there, and he'll know that idea of moving into I couldn't possibly have a view on that space is very much where we often find ourselves when people are thinking, how can you let that one in? And you're thinking, well, actually, it's not about what I think from a perspective of my own being. It's about actually, what's the right fit in terms of the charity test. And I think it's very important that we keep that pure. The register is the last thing I want to mention on this. We're so delighted that it continues to be really highly used. It's used by everybody from academics to funders to charities themselves. To a lot of the charities actually use it to keep an eye on themselves, which I find a bit surreal, but that's quite handy. I suppose knowing that we're a keeper of stuff actually seems to make it quite handy for people, so that's all good. And why do we do it? It's a combination, isn't it? We are really very much working to make sure that charities are held to account, and that this charity sector is trusted by the public. The public really needs to know that charities are doing what they say they're doing on the tin, and that's the essence of our job. But as an enabling regulator, it's very much our job to make sure that we are also working to support the charity sector to continuously improve. And we always know that we're pushing at an open door with that, which is great. That's why there's so many people here, frankly, isn't it? Because it's not that we don't have other things to do, but we all want to come along and learn. It's a passionate area. So let me move on to the charity and public surveys. We do these every 2 years, and we go out and we engage with charities. Well, we don't. We hire an independent company to do that, because when we would ask you, you'd probably all tell us we were great and we were lovely. Maybe you wouldn't, but we luckily hire independent researchers to do this for us. And it's been a really fascinating time for us, what time to be looking and have the natural time for our next set of surveys to really find out where are people now in terms of thinking about what does it mean to be business as usual now? What does that all mean? People talk about COVID recovery. We're stopping talking about being in a pandemic. We're just saying, now what is everybody getting back to business as usual now? We wanted to really use this set of surveys to really understand where the public and where charities were. So I think the way we do it is really, really useful, and I want to just share some of the highlights with you. Hopefully you can all see that. interesting things in some of this, and as I say, we're publishing today. If you get onto our website later on, you will be able to get the full detail of this. And I can imagine already looking around the room, there's quite a lot of you who will be downloading, so that's great. The trend of public trust in charities, I think, is incredibly reassuring. It's good, and it's an upward trend. There's a nice simple statement on that. But one of the things that's ever enduring is society's fascination for scandal. So people remember a scandal, and so areas, things that happened quite a number of years ago now. People still talk about kids' company as though awful things happened there. I can't even remember the details, but terrible things happened there, and so all charities are still maybe a bit like that. And you think, well, nothing that bad happened there, and actually, so many positive things came out of the learnings from not only kids' company but many others. But that's what's remembered, because unfortunately the society doesn't tend to promote the great news stories and the incredible things of charities. No matter how many media releases you all put out and we all put out, they're not the things that are picked up. And so it takes a while for those things to move out of being the default in some of the questions that we're posing with the public. But I think it's really encouraging to me that over this period we've seen that trust really start to grow. So although people still remember that, they're saying, actually no, that we've had so many positive experiences with charities, with those that we know that actually that we can actually increase our trust. If we keep looking at some of the other things around trust, it is that negative publicity, the perceptions. Perceptions are big. So we do still hear people talking about the large salaries. I can't imagine that there's many of you sitting in the room thinking, yes, me and my huge salary working in the charity sector, I do it so that I can holiday all the time in the Caribbean 5 times a year. I think most of us are not in that situation. We don't come into any kind of public service to earn the big bucks. And certainly, I know even from my own perspective, moving from the charity sector into government, when I did that move 15 years ago, I was the deputy CEO of YouthLink Scotland, a nice big organisation, and yet when I moved into a fairly ordinary grade job, I was thinking, wow, look at the salary, look at these terms and conditions. Gosh, this is amazing. Why have I not done this a long time ago? But people's perceptions are still there very strongly, and that's something that I think we all actually need to make sure that we're telling our stories better to actually get away from these perceptions. I also, though, would never ever say that people shouldn't be paid their value, and I think that's a very important part of our story. Too often we still hear stories of people talking about particular sectors and saying, well, we quite often bring the third sector and charity sector in because they're cheaper than others. And you think, should we be cheaper? Should you be cheaper? That's an interesting space to be in. Hopefully be talking about that sort of thing over the next couple of days while you're in various sessions. So it's an interesting thing again if you look and think, what do people think about when they're thinking about charities? Back to that lovely slide we had with all of the different types, the big universities and so on. That's not what people view, and we all know that. Who do I think of? Well, I think of the trust who own the little patch of land beside my house. I think then about Historic Environment Scotland, and I think about the half a dozen charities that I give to regularly. That's, if I think about it quickly, they're the ones I think about. But this is the trustworthiness of it, I think, is a fascinating piece where people are thinking it's people without paid staff, those funded by government and local charities. I don't think that these are things that we need to be concerned about in terms of worrying. I think we actually need to be flipping that around and thinking, what are the opportunities in here about why it's important that charities have staff, why it's important that a lot of charities have paid staff. It's nothing to be ashamed of, it's something to be celebrated. We wouldn't have the service delivery that we have in Scotland today without that. So how do we take the messages of what the perception is of trustworthiness and flip that round? The markers, again, we just love data. I'm sure there's a lot of other data geeks in the room today, but we love a bit of data in the organisation because it really helps us to get to the bottom of things. Looking at this and thinking about how people understand the evidence of what a charity has achieved, and we still don't think people are making as best use as they can of annual reports, annual accounts, celebrating and talking about the work that they've tried that didn't work well, but what they're going to do better next time. There are better ways to tell the stories, I think, rather than thinking we need to put veneers on. And I think just having that evidence out there puts such trust out there. And I think so many organisations do that brilliantly, but we all need to start learning lessons from each other around that. For us, I suppose it's nice that people also think it's reassuring that there's a regulator there. So that's not something we take for granted. We like to ask that so that we understand it a bit better. How are things for charities? A lot of this will be obvious to all of you. No surprise that at this time financial challenges are featuring high. Running costs there, always running costs. So more than 15 years since I was working in charities, and the most depressing money I ever had to go and look for was running costs, because very often funders don't want to give the money to the boring piece. Now I'm saying that as a sweeping statement. There are great funders out there, an increasing amount of funders, including government, who are actually saying we need to make sure the core's working. That's great, but it's that sinking feeling of running costs, and that's certainly something that we're hearing about. And we were still hearing about that disruption. So, as I said at the top of this, how interesting that we're now talking about business as usual, but actually this is probably the year where people are thinking, okay, now I'm not firefighting, now I'm not dealing with the absolute immediacy of what do we want to be next. So we're expecting an awful lot of big questions happening for charities this year in that space. What do charities say about OSCR? Some of these things. People are usually satisfied with us, which is nice. And one of the really surprising things for us was that OSCR is the second most common source for advice for the breadth of charities that are out there. That's a conversation that we need to start having with intermediaries, with other organisations, to really stop and think, why are they coming to us first? Not that we don't want people to come to us. We love it when people use our guidance and use our information and so on. But it's an unusual space for a regulator to be so high up in terms of being that point of call and that point of contact. So I think there are bigger conversations that's taking us into that we want to consider. And what do the public say about OSCR? They don't know us, most of them. OSCR is such a strange name, and we moved away from using that quite often. For a period of time, we only talked about ourselves as Scottish Charity Regulator, and every now and again we flip back and forth. When we're in a trusted audience, we talk about ourselves as OSCR, because that's how you talk about us very often. But there is still something about people knowing there is a regulator out there. So they're saying, we might not know who you are, the detail of who you are, but in the nicest possible way. We don't care, because we know you're there, and we know we can find you if we need you. So that's pretty good. Interesting when you look at the bottom piece there, where people, the perception, although people don't know us and the detail of our work, there's still a group of people who are saying we need to actually see you taking tougher action. So we might not know what action you take, but we'd like it to be tougher. So that's kind of one of those interesting places that we need to think about. So what does this all mean for OSCR? Let me just have a wee look at this in a little bit of detail, and I'm going to go through these points as we go. We've been talking for a long time. In fact, our corporate plan 2023 it really did highlight the fact that we wanted to move into increased publication and so on. Then, like everybody else, we went into a pandemic, and that came with a different set of prioritisation. We have been publishing more. We are doing things differently there, but we're saying transparency now is the key to what we want to do with this. We want people to know more and understand more of how we work. And we want to actually really take all of these points that we have here, and many of the others, from the substantial data and analysis we have of what we need to do. And this question at the bottom is that key of how we balance the support for the sector, offer the reassurance, and make sure that people do know that we will deal with anything around wrongdoing and deterring further cases. If I can say to you from that point of view, what's an interesting thing is if you were to ask any of us, the vast majority of things we deal with have never been done on purpose. I mean, the aggravation for people is that things that happen tend to happen by mistake. They happen because people thought they were doing the right thing, but they weren't. So that's absolutely where so many organisations and so many of the organisations we need to work with as intermediaries and so on, we all need to get that right, because there are too many people stumbling into awkward situations and unfortunate situations. So what we're doing this year, some of these areas, we are changing OSCR Online. We've been talking about that for a little while, so anybody who joined us on the virtual gathering last year will be thinking, didn't she say that last year? I did say that last year. Like any complex, large-scale sort of digital project, we've had a few complications along the way with this, but it's because actually we want to get it right. And we could have jumped in quickly and said, "Oh, good luck with that. Is that okay?" But we want to make sure that the transition for everybody who has to deal with OSCR Online as a customer and for us is as smooth as possible. So that's coming soon. We really do want to work on the transparency space, the support to the sector, and have that wider policy space. And we work very closely with Scottish Government colleagues across a wide range of departments. So much of what government do at national, local and UK level touches charities, and we've been working very, very hard over the last few years to make sure that people are actually coming and talking to us and using our data intelligence long before they start going out to consultation, so at very early stages, and there's a lot more of that to be done this year. So this is what we're doing about the changes to OSCR Online. We have been really talking to people about it, so the redesign is in that new statement that we're starting to hear. I've heard it a few times already, from the ground up, is the way people mention, so that's great. We'll be making sure that there's that option to nominate 3 individual users, and that will stop people having to share login details. Charities are different and complicated beasts out there, and we need to make sure that that people can actually do their updating, and that we've got direct links into our latest channels, our latest news and channels rather. The big important message here is, please, if you're sitting with your if you're sitting with your return and you're thinking, oh, I'll just want to check that over an extra few times and then do it, please do it as early as you can, because we are going to move into a space where we will close the system for a week, and we don't want that to be the very week that you were thinking, well, that was the only week I had. So if you can, do it early, please. So in the increasing transparency space, we really want to look at publishing our lessons learned a great deal more. There's been a lot of discussion about whether or not the work we do is quite subtle and subliminal. What we don't want to do, this is not about saying every time anybody does something, we're going to write a very large scale thing saying Charity X did this, and now we're going to tell you why they got it wrong and what we did to support them in that. This is about us looking at more sophisticated ways of sharing lessons learned, sharing approaches to things that are working well, so that people can actually learn from those lessons. But we do actually want to make sure that we're publishing, and we've highlighted these not because they are of particular concern, but actually because they are recent reports that we published on an interim basis. I think that's a really healthy thing for us to do, to make sure that people know that when we're looking at a charity, and for us to say, actually, this is a piece of action that we've taken now while we're still having a look and doing other things. But as an interim, here's something you should all know. And that's a factual, straightforward thing. We won't be doing that every 5 minutes, but I think it's important that we're doing a little bit more of that. Reporting and supporting the sector. So we want to make sure that we're doing a lot around the charity annual reports. In an ideal, and we've talked about this before, but just to be really clear, we want to move increasingly into much more of a self-evaluation space for that annual report, annual return, so that it is actually about really enabling and encourage people to say to us, yes, we've had a really good look at this, and this is they're almost using it as an assurance. piece. But rather than thinking, I've heard some cheeky people every now and again, I'm sure they're not in the group today, but saying, actually, I just send them the same stuff every year and see if they'll even notice. And you think, well, that's a shame, isn't it? Because that's what you're publishing and that's what you're putting out into the public domain. So using it is not for us, it's actually for everyone. And I think we want to make sure that it feels like something that you're doing for yourselves as an organisation, but that happens to also be the annual return you send to us. So the questions and the changes we want to make will really flip into that space. We also want to find better targeted ways of engaging with charities who fail to submit accounts. Again, nobody's doing that on purpose, we don't think. Very few people, I think most people that don't put them in are hiding in a hole thinking, I've got way too much on in my real life and this is too hard. And we need to find better ways to make sure that all of us are working to support that. We do a lot of work in the background with professional advisors and so on. And actually, to be honest, one of the main things I do in that space is I'm asking them to ask charities different questions. Be not in that familiar space, but actually walking in and asking the kind of slightly tougher questions that are going to enable things to get over the line. We're almost there. Wider policy work, we are using our regulator experience to influence and inform the proposed amendments and improvements to charity law and other legislation that has significant impact on the sector. So, as I say, when we see things coming through, we have a team who's sitting there looking and thinking, oh, there's programme for government. We don't just go through it looking for charities. We look thinking, well, there's a huge part of the charity sector in that theme, in that space. Wow, what's proposed there is going to have an impact. And then we start making calls to our colleagues in government to say, you haven't been in touch with us, but you probably need to talk to us long before you do anything. So there'll be more and more of that. And we are sharing more and more of our data with MSPs and so on. It's fair to say that as a non-ministerial office who reports to Parliament, we don't actually have a lot of Parliament engagement as an organisation, and that's something that we want to improve. We want to be proactive in that space and make sure that those who are there making that legislative change that does have an impact on the charity sector have a really good understanding of who we are. So again, we're sending lots of material out to MSPs and their colleagues. We also have a charities reference group, and we will be recruiting to that soon. Again, we started that, Paula, 2 years ago, just about?
September after the pandemic.
Yeah, thank you. And it works really, really well for us. It's a really important thing to have a reference group that are strong, eloquent, and brave, and will look at things and say, oh, no, I don't think you should do that. Can you do that? So we take our ideas of, this is what we're thinking about doing with this change. These are questions that we're going to change. Does that work for you? What do you think about that? Does that feel like a rotten thing? So we're trying to make sure that we're working with that group well. So if you are interested, then keep an eye, because we will be recruiting. We'll also have Trustees Week coming up, and we use that every year to make sure that we are really focused in on the trustees and celebrating those who have the governance role in their organisations. Loads of ways to keep in touch with us, and many of you do, so thank you for that. These are the obvious examples in there, so please do keep in touch with us.